Good morning, afternoon, or evening, folks, and welcome to Cast of All Trades, the show where we talk about developing skills, exploring ideas, and following curiosity. I'm your host, Orion Siebert, and in this episode, I talk about the dark side of generalism, in particular, 7 disadvantages to being a generalist. With that said, this episode isn't all about doom and gloom for the generalists out there, because I also talk about how we can overcome some of these disadvantages. There are pros and cons to any lifestyle, including being a generalist or being a specialist. It's mostly a matter of deciding for yourself which problems you'd rather live with. For more episodes like this, don't forget to subscribe to the show so you don't miss out on those. I believe that about covers it. So, without further ado, let's talk about 7 disadvantages of being a generalist. Disadvantage number 1. Specific situations where a real master is required or a real master is available. When compared one-on-one against a master of a certain craft, the generalist would likely lose. And even though we live in a world today where we have many problems, the thing is, especially in urban environments, there's a guy for everything. There's a specialist for any issue that comes up. We've created a world where specialists are always one call away to solve any problem that we have, thus making a generalist skill set less valuable overall. If you have the time or money to pay for a specialist to come and do whatever it is that you need them to do, awesome. Then you don't have to learn any of the skills for yourself. But when you look at other situations where perhaps you don't have a specialist on hand, then a generalist is much more helpful. Someone who has access to a wider array of skill sets, who's better able to solve and figure out problems. So as I said earlier, when compared one-on-one against a master of a certain craft, the generalist would likely lose. But place the generalist head-to-head against a specific specialist across a wide array of problems and situations, the generalist would likely win. For us generalists to thrive more, we need to find situations where you do really need a wider array of skills to solve sets of problems, or to be in situations where your generalist skill set is going to be more applicable than one specific masterful skill that someone has. A good example of this is, as I mentioned earlier, in urban environments, there's a guy for everything. Got a plumbing issue? Call the plumber. Got an electricity issue? Call the electrician. Really need someone to help you figure out how to do your workouts? Find the person who does the exact type of workout that you want and call them to have them teach you how to do that one thing very well. That's great and all, but not everyone lives in an urban environment, and often urban environments are horrible for human flourishing, but that's a totally other different conversation. What I want to get at here is that in the rural environment, you're not always going to have a specialist on hand, or even if they are on hand, they might be a good distance away, or they might be more expensive than what you can afford. Let's look at the farmer, for example. The farmer isn't just a farmer. He doesn't just deal with crops. He doesn't just deal with animals. He's also a diesel repair mechanic. He's a plumber. He's an electrician and a carpenter, and so much more because he has to be. When the tractor fails or when the tractor falls apart, he has to be able to fix it because that's his livelihood. He has to be able to do that, and he can't always call in the diesel mechanic when, something's going wrong here. In rural environments, more or less, you're going to have to develop a wider array of skills just because, one, there are fewer people out there to be able to help you with any specific needs that you might have. And two, even if there were more people out there, just hiring people to solve your problems for you is expensive. So being able to do it yourself is often a better option for many people who are out in rural areas. Hiring out or learning how to do skills yourself, neither of them is necessarily the quote-unquote correct answer for everyone. You can have someone who is well off, lives in an urban environment, and is able to hire someone to solve all of his needs, to be able to get his plumbing done, to be able to get his electricity done, to be able to get a fine table put together for him and his family. Or you could be someone who, yes, even in an urban environment, decides, you know what, I'm going to do my plumbing myself. I'm going to do my electricity work myself. I'm going to make my own table for my family to sit at over dinner. Neither of them is necessarily right. Neither of them is necessarily wrong. It's just a different choice in lifestyle. But that brings us back to the main point of this, that a specific disadvantage of being a generalist is that in many situations, a real master is just one call away. So, would you rather call the master to have them solve the issue for you, or would you rather develop a wider skill set and solve it for yourself? There is no right answer to that. second disadvantage of being a generalist is that the perception of being the jack of all trades is generally negative. This is one I'm going to bring up a couple times throughout this episode because it has more leading implications. But when people think about the word jack of all trades or the phrase jack of all trades, they often think of the quote, a jack of all trades is a master of none. But they neglect the rest of the quote, but the jack of all trades is often better than the master of one. They're also commonly thought of as a non-committal or non-willing person not able to stick to one thing, because apparently sticking to one thing all the time is supposed to be a good thing. To me, that just means boring, but needless to say, there's this perception of being a jack of all trades, being someone who is pretty good at a bunch of different things, can be sometimes positive, but sometimes negative. It just depends on the situation that you're in. It's commonly discouraged by schools and parents to go out and do many things, go out and quote unquote specialize in many things, unless you're trying to look good or well rounded for college applications. And even then, you're strategically picking what skills you're trying to learn and develop, what sort of things you can put on your applications to say, look at me, I've done X, Y, and Z. Don't I look appealing? Don't I look good? Don't I look like a well rounded individual? Which, sure, you are a more well rounded individual, but were those things that you really wanted to do? If not, then what was the point? Or did you just learn them to put them on an application to say, look, I'm a well-rounded individual? Or would you rather go out and learn skills you actually care about, go out and try different things you actually care about, and then say, yes, I'm a well-rounded individual and I chose these things to do. It wasn't just a thing that I chose because this will look good on an application, which there is a time and place for that stuff, but if you can, why not choose to be a jack of all trades and do the things that you want to do and not just the things that you're sort of pushed to go and do? Anyways, the general perception of the jack of all trades is oftentimes negative overall, mostly attributing that to the quote, the jack of all trades is the master of none, and most people neglecting the second half of, but the jack of all trades is often better than the master of one. The third disadvantage of being a generalist is oftentimes you might have a lowered self-confidence when comparing yourself to others. While you might do a number of things well, if not great, perhaps you'll feel inferior to the man who specializes in doing one thing because you think to yourself, should I have just done that one thing? Should have just stuck with that one thing? Imagine how far ahead I could be if I just did that one thing. At the same time, other people may also treat you differently or see you as quote-unquote less than because they perceive you having a lack of specialization as a sort of disadvantage or being inferior to specialized persons. Again, coming back to the whole jack of all trades is a master of none. And to that, I say, comparison is the thief of joy. Know that there were many people who were also comparing themselves to you, thinking to themselves, I wish I could have done that, learned all those skills that this other person has. I wish I could have gone and experienced so many different things. I wish that I didn't just dedicate my life to doing this one thing. One of the most common regrets that people have on their deathbed is that they wish that they had done more. They wish that they had worked less, and they went and they did more with their families, did more with their friends, learned more skills, tried more things. People typically want to do more, not less. Ultimately, if you're satisfied with the direction of your life, then who cares what other people are doing? It's your life. You live it how you want to. Disadvantage number 4 is a personal branding / marketing issue. Because you do so much, it's difficult to market yourself properly. In my experience, generalists are often viewed as less common or less valuable than specialists because they don't have an obvious value proposition compared to the specialist. The specialist is able to say, I have dedicated my life to doing X, I can do X for you very well. Whereas the generalist might say, I can do X, Y, and Z, and this is why it matters. Oftentimes people don't know, the generalists don't know how and this is why it matters part. They're good at saying, I can do X, Y, and Z, but very rarely can they compile that together and present it in a good, meaningful way to whoever, as a way of saying, I can do a bunch of things, and this is how it's useful. As mentioned earlier, with the ready availability of specialists for any topic or skill, the need to know many skills has diminished, and to be able to market why your skill set of diverse skills and abilities can be useful is still quite difficult, especially because there isn't as clean of a blueprint for generalists as there is for specialists. For specialists, they say, I went to this school, I learned this thing, this is how many years of experience I have in it, and this is how it's useful to you. For generalists, it's, I went and did this thing, then I went and did that thing, and I learned these couple other things, and this is what I've done. And very rarely can they bring that all together to say, And this is how I can use all that experiences and all these skills to be useful to you. So being able to bring all those skills together and really market that in a good way is something that you just kind of have to figure out on your own. Disadvantage number 5, very similarly and closely tied to the previous one, is the early career. Getting into a career can be more difficult compared to the specialist because, again, not having that clear marketing value proposition, it can be very difficult for generalists to pitch themselves to companies, to employers, to say, this is why you need me here. This is why I'm going to be more useful to you than a specialist is. Pitching yourself to a company is going to be more difficult if you're a more multifaceted human being and can't explain all of your diverse skill sets and how they'll be a great boon to a company, especially in a clean, cohesive, short manner, because companies are busy. They don't want to spend their time trying to figure out, oh, where does this person belong? That said, this is an issue that most people are going to face as they're trying to enter the job market. Perhaps less so compared to the generalist, but even specialists will have to figure out, how do I pitch myself to these companies in such a way that they want to have me on here? Typically, they have a little bit of an easier time doing it because they have a clear value proposition of, I do this thing really well, compared to the generalist, which says, I do a bunch of things pretty well, if not really well, and this is how it comes together. But it's going to vary from person to person as well. It's mostly a matter of figuring out, how can I make myself stand out from the crowd in a way that's good and positive, so that prospective employers walk away thinking, that guy was cool, that guy was interesting, I want to work with that person. But the sad truth of it is, many companies want specialists because they aren't looking for innovators. They aren't looking for people to shake things up. They're looking for a cog that fits into their machine very well. Another byproduct of the availability of specialists for everything is that entering the workforce can be really difficult. But moving up, from what I've seen, is typically easier for generalists. Because generalists have a wider skill set, they're typically able to transition from a tactical role to more of a manager role. They're able to transition roles much easier than a specialist might. Here's a good example of what that would look like. When I was in college, I was looking for an internship for when I was a business student, and I met with a solar company. They initially weren't very interested in me until I mentioned that I also had experience with 3D modeling and SolidWorks and that I had a certification in it. That made me an ideal candidate, not for a internship position, but for potentially getting a engineering managing position, because I spoke both the languages of business and engineering. The main issue was that I was trying to find a place to get started, and trying to find a place to put me to get me started in the company wasn't easy. Ultimately, it was a role that I ended up passing up on, but it goes to show that being a generalist is helpful in the long run if you're trying to move up in a company, because that'll help you transition from place to place to place much easier than the specialist who only knows their one thing very well. And oftentimes when specialists are promoted, they're promoted up to the point of incompetency, i.e., they might be a great salesperson, but when they're promoted to becoming a sales manager, they're not a good manager, so they stay there because they can't work their way up anymore. They're incompetent at being a manager. They're a great salesperson, but not a great manager. That's where the roles of being a generalist and a specialist flip, where it's more easy for a specialist to get their foot in the door, but it's typically easier for the generalist to work their way up in the company. Disadvantage number 6. A misconception that many people believe to be true is that specialists will earn more than generalists, and this just isn't true. It depends heavily on the field that you're in and how you deploy your skills. For example, medical, engineering, law, and accounting are fields that I would say it's generally true that specialists will make more than generalists. If you know a very specific kind of medical procedure and you are the number one and best person at that medical procedure, you can charge out the nose to do that procedure. If you're very good at one particular type of law, great. Most people don't want a general practitioner to work on them for their brain surgery. They would rather have a brain surgeon for that. Most people don't want a general attorney, a general lawyer, to help them with a very specialized patent case if that's what they're working on. For that sort of stuff, I would say definitely being a specialist at one thing is very, very helpful. That said, there's still space in these fields and many other fields for generalists to outcompete the specialist. Where generalists tend to thrive especially is in industries where innovation is welcomed and rewarded. Let's look at the music industry, for example. To make a lot of money in the music industry, let's look at the specialist versus the generalist. You either have to be the best of the best with a major team behind the scenes, managing, marketing, producing, scheduling, and more, if not even writing the music, where you're essentially just the face of it. Most people will never be here. However, if you're a generalist who's pretty good at singing, pretty good at playing an instrument in a few styles, marketing and sales, you're literally a one-man band who can pay the bills comfortably because you're not just trying to thrive off of a single skill, and that's the point here. There's much more to making money with a single skill than how good you are at that one skill. If you're only bringing that one skill to the table, you need a foundation, you need something built around you, you need a structure built around you that allows you to make money with that single skill, with many other people using their single skills to help make that whole thing work. Whereas if you're a generalist, you aren't relying on a single skill, you're relying on a skill set. I've seen great musicians fail because they never got the group of people around them who could do the marketing, who could do the promotion, who could do the producing, who could do all of that. I've seen much worse musicians be successful because they were pretty good at singing, they were pretty good at playing an instrument, but they were great at sales and marketing. There's more to being good at a skill and making money with a skill than just doing that one skill very well. Also, as times change and technology advances, if you're reliant on a single skill for your income, you could easily be innovated out of a job, with your one skill suddenly becoming totally useless. So do specialists make more money than generalists? It depends. It really does depend. On average, probably not, but if you look at the absolute extremes, definitely, the specialist is going to make more money. If they're the absolute best at that one thing, and they have the proper foundation, the proper structure built around them, the specialist will do much better than the generalist. But on average, if you aren't going to be the number one in the field, then the generalist is going to far do better than the specialists or the attempted specialists ever could. Last but not least, disadvantage number 7. Occasionally, you'll experience a lack of focus while learning. This, of course, is shiny object syndrome. And there is something to people's negative perception of jack of all trades and generalists saying, oh, you're just non-committal, you're not good at sticking to one thing, which can be very true for some of us. Many of us do distinctly suffer from shiny object syndrome, where with so many things to learn and do, it's so easy to get distracted to say, ooh, a new cool thing over there, I gotta go do that. Ooh, another thing over here, let me drop the thing I was just doing and go learn that instead. This is a big problem that journalists have to face and ultimately have to develop one very important skill to solve. That is the skill of prioritizing, setting times and seasons for different skills. You can go in many directions, pursue many things, but rarely can you do it all at once. For example, I've learned how to do that, sort of, in a couple of different ways. For me, I like to work on a few projects at a time, a few skills at a time, so I can rotate between them when I get stuck. For example, when I was doing woodworking, sometimes I would work on that for a while, then I would come across a problem and think, I don't know how to solve this right now, let me go work on something else. And I would go do physics homework. Then as I was doing physics homework, I would think about a solution for my woodworking. I would come back to that. As soon as I got stuck on a physics problem, it's like, okay, go back to woodworking. As I was woodworking, I would think through it and figure out the physics problem, or maybe I would come up with a new thing that I wanted to go work on that for a while. Now, essentially have 3 or 4 different skills, different projects going on at a time, so that whenever I got stuck on one, I could transition to a different project, go work on that for a bit, until my brain came up with a solution for that previous problem that it came up with. This is not something that most people should do. Most people should just focus on one thing at a time, setting your priorities to say, I'm working on this for an extended period of time until I get to this point. I'll actually be digging more into this in next week's episode when I talk about when have you learned enough and when do you decide to call it good. So in summary, while there are disadvantages to being a generalist, there are also disadvantages to being a specialist, and as the saying goes, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Ultimately, you have to decide for yourself what sort of lifestyle you want to live, that of the specialist or that of the generalist. I know what I'm choosing. How about you? If you enjoyed this episode, then please share it with a friend you think would like it, or share it on social media. It would absolutely mean the world to me, and it helps the podcast grow so much. With all that said, thanks for listening. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later. Ciao.